The evening had started like any other small-town event. The community hall was packed with families, students, and elderly folks who had come to enjoy a charity concert. The soft chatter of the audience filled the air, mixing with the faint sound of tuning instruments. On the stage stood a glossy black piano under the warm glow of a single spotlight. One by one, local performers walked up and played. Some were nervous, some confident, but all were cheered for. The mood was light and cheerful, yet no one knew that this ordinary night was about to turn unforgettable. Near the back row sat a woman, quiet and still. She wore a light veil that covered most of her face, the kind worn by those who prefer not to be noticed. She held her hands together, fingers resting gently against each other, almost as if protecting them. People around her barely noticed she was there. She looked like someone who had come just to watch, not to take part. When the host stepped up again, smiling into the microphone, he asked if anyone from the audience wanted to volunteer to play something. A few people laughed. Some nudged their friends jokingly, whispering that they should try. But no one raised a hand. The host chuckled awkwardly and looked around the room. "Come on," he said kindly. "There must be someone brave enough to give it a try." And then from the back of the hall a soft voice spoke. "I can play," the woman said quietly. The sound of her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the silence. Heads turned toward her. The host looked surprised but quickly smiled, gesturing for her to come forward. "Oh, wonderful. Please, come on up," people began whispering. "Who is she?" someone asked. "Why is she wearing that veil?" another murmured. The woman stood up slowly. She was calm, graceful even, but there was something mysterious about her. As she made her way through the rows of chairs toward the stage, the audience fell quiet again. Every eye followed her. The sound of her shoes tapping against the wooden floor was the only thing echoing in the hall. When she reached the piano, she paused for a moment, looking at the keys as if greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in years. The host gave her a friendly nod and stepped aside, letting her take the seat. The woman adjusted her veil slightly, took a small breath, and placed her hands gently on the keys. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd waited, unsure what to expect. The woman sat perfectly still. Her shoulders rose and fell once, and then the first note rang out. The sound was pure, delicate, and filled the entire hall like a soft breeze. The first few notes blended beautifully into each other, forming a melody that caught everyone's attention. Conversations stopped. Even the children who had been restless earlier sat still, eyes wide, listening. There was something different about the way she played. It wasn't showy or loud, it was heartfelt. Each touch of the key felt like it carried emotion, like she was telling a story without saying a word. As the melody grew, so did the energy in the room. The soft rhythm began to pull the audience into her world. The music danced between joy and sadness, between hope and loss. The audience didn't know who she was, but they could feel something powerful in her music. It was as if every note carried a piece of her soul. The host stood at the edge of the stage, completely frozen. He had seen many performances that night, but this felt different, almost sacred. Even the sound technician leaned forward, forgetting to adjust the microphone as he watched her hands move across the piano. Her fingers glided smoothly, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, each motion precise yet emotional. For a few minutes, the audience forgot everything else. They weren't in a small hall anymore. They were lost inside her music. Some people closed their eyes, letting the melody wash over them. Others leaned forward in their seats, trying to see her face beneath the veil, curious about the person behind this beautiful sound. Halfway through the performance, a faint tremor ran through her hands. She hesitated for just a second, and for that brief pause, the room seemed to hold its breath. Then she took a small breath, steadied herself, and continued playing. Stronger, deeper, more emotional than before. Whatever that moment was, it only made her performance more real. It was raw and human, filled with vulnerability and courage. The music shifted again, becoming gentle, almost like a lullaby. It felt like she was whispering something to the piano, maybe sharing a secret, maybe saying goodbye. People could feel her emotions pouring out through every chord. The piece had no name, no announcement, but everyone could tell it was special. It was the kind of music that stays with you long after it ends. A little boy sitting in the front row tugged on his mother's sleeve. "She's really good," he whispered. His mother nodded, eyes still glistening. "Yes," she murmured softly. "She's more than good." As the song neared its end, the music grew softer, fading like the last rays of the sun slipping behind the horizon. Her fingers slowed, each note lingering a little longer than the last. When she finally played the final note, it hung in the air for a few seconds, and then silence. No one moved. The audience just sat there, still caught in the moment. Then, as if waking from a dream, someone began to clap. The sound spread quickly until the entire hall erupted in applause. People stood up, cheering, clapping louder, some even shouting, "Bravo!" The woman bowed her head slightly, hands resting gently on her lap. The host walked back on stage, speechless for a moment. He smiled, clearly moved. "That," he said finally, his voice soft, "was incredible." The woman said nothing. She just gave a small nod, stood up, and stepped away from the piano. As she walked back toward her seat, people tried to talk to her, to thank her, but she didn't stop. She simply returned to her quiet place at the back, sitting down again with calm grace. The applause followed her until it slowly faded away. Around her, people whispered again, but this time their tone had changed. It wasn't curiosity anymore. It was admiration. "Who is she?" someone asked softly. "She plays like she's been through everything," another replied. A few people thought she might be a music teacher or a professional who decided to surprise everyone. Others thought she might be someone famous hiding her identity. No one knew for sure, and she didn't offer an explanation. After the event ended, the host tried to look for her, but she was gone. The chair where she had been sitting was empty. Only a small white handkerchief was left behind on the seat, folded neatly. On it was embroidered a single musical note. That night, people couldn't stop talking about the veiled woman. Some recorded short clips of her playing and shared them online. Within hours, the videos began to spread. People were amazed by the way she played. Not just her skill, but the emotion behind every note. Comments flooded in from around the world. Listeners said her music made them feel something deep inside, something they couldn't explain. But no one could identify her. There was no name, no background, just a mysterious pianist in a veil who had come out of nowhere, played her heart out, and vanished into the night. What no one knew was that the woman hadn't planned to perform that evening. She had only come to listen, to quietly sit in the corner and remind herself what it felt like to be near music again. For years, she had stayed away from the piano, away from stages, away from people. But when she saw that grand piano under the spotlight, something inside her stirred. It was as if the piano itself called her forward, asking her to remember who she once was. And so she did. For a brief moment, she allowed the world to see a glimpse of the passion she had hidden for so long. Her veil didn't just cover her face. It carried her fears, her pain, her past. But that night, behind that veil, she found the courage to play again. And though no one knew her story yet, they could all feel it, in the way her music touched their hearts. That night marked the quiet beginning of something beautiful, though no one, not even the veiled pianist herself, realized it yet. The next morning, the town was still talking about the mysterious veiled pianist. Everyone who had been there the previous night had a story to tell. Some said her hands moved like magic. Others said her music made them cry without knowing why. The small community hadn't seen something that moving in years. Clips of her playing were everywhere online. The shaky videos taken by audience members had gone viral overnight. Thousands of people watched them again and again, replaying that moment where she sat quietly before the piano, then filled the room with sound that seemed to come straight from her heart. In cafes, people replayed the video on their phones and spoke in awe. "Who is she?" they kept asking. "Why did she cover her face? Where did she go afterward?" The mystery only added to the fascination. Far away from all the noise, the woman herself sat in a small apartment, the same veil folded neatly beside her. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting soft shadows across her piano, an old upright she'd owned for years. She ran her fingers across the keys, though she didn't play. Her hands trembled slightly, the same way they had during the performance. Her chest was still heavy with emotion. That night had brought back feelings she'd buried long ago, not all of them easy ones. She hadn't meant to perform, but when she saw that piano, something deep inside her had pulled her forward. The crowd, the music, the silence afterward. It all felt like a dream she wasn't sure she was ready to wake up from. For years she had avoided stages. Music had once been her life, but after a terrible accident, everything had changed. Her hands, once so strong and sure, had been left weak. Doctors had told her she might never play again. The pain, both physical and emotional, had been unbearable. She had disappeared from the world of music, leaving behind the career she'd built and the life she had known. But music never really left her. It stayed quietly in the corners of her mind, a melody that refused to fade away. Some nights, when the world was asleep, she would play softly, only for herself. The piano became her secret, her only connection to the person she used to be. That night at the charity concert, she hadn't planned to reveal that part of herself. She had gone there just to listen, to support a friend organizing the event, and maybe to feel close to music again, even if she wasn't the one performing. But fate had other plans. When the host had asked for a volunteer, something had stirred inside her. It wasn't pride or confidence. It was a quiet voice that said, "Just once more." Now, sitting alone, she wondered if she had made a mistake. She hadn't expected anyone to record her. She hadn't wanted attention. But when she opened her phone, she saw her face, or rather, her veiled figure, everywhere. People were calling her the veiled pianist. At first, she thought about taking the videos down. She didn't want the attention or the questions. But then she began reading the comments. "This music gave me hope again. I don't know who she is, but her pain is in every note." I was crying before I even realized it. The words touched her deeply. Strangers she had never met were connecting to the same emotions that had lived in her heart for so long. Her music, the one thing she thought she had lost, was reaching people again. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Still, she couldn't shake off the fear. Fame wasn't what she wanted. She didn't want people to look at her with pity. She wanted them to listen, to feel, not to wonder about the story behind the veil. She turned away from the screen and looked at her piano again. The instrument seemed to call her silently. She took a slow breath and placed her hands on the keys. Her fingers hesitated, but then began to move. The notes were shaky at first, uncertain, but soon they found their rhythm. The melody she played that morning was gentle, a reflection of her thoughts. It spoke of rediscovery, of fear slowly giving way to courage. The sound filled her small apartment, bouncing softly off the walls. And though she played alone, it didn't feel lonely. For the first time, she felt like she was healing. Meanwhile, back in town, the charity event organizers were overwhelmed by the attention. News channels and journalists had begun calling, asking for information about the mysterious pianist. They didn't know much either. All they could say was that she had walked in quietly, volunteered, and vanished after playing the final piece. The host, still moved by that night, couldn't get her music out of his mind. "She didn't play like someone performing," he told a reporter. "She played like someone remembering." A week later, the video had reached millions of views. People from other countries had translated comments into different languages. Musicians posted covers of her piece, calling it the Veiled Sonata. It had become a phenomenon, not because of glamour, but because of pure emotion. Still, the pianist stayed silent. She didn't contact anyone. She didn't reveal her name. She simply continued to play quietly at home, away from the world. But something inside her was changing. She started feeling drawn back to music in ways she hadn't before. One evening, a letter arrived in her mailbox. It was handwritten and had no return address. The handwriting was neat and careful. Inside was a short note. "Your music saved me that night. I was going through something dark, and hearing you play gave me strength. I don't know who you are, but thank you for reminding me that beauty still exists." She read the note several times, her eyes welling up. That single message touched her more deeply than all the fame and online noise. It reminded her of why she had ever loved music in the first place, not for applause, but for connection. That night she played again, this time without hesitation. The melody was new, hopeful, tender, alive. She played for the person who wrote that letter, and for herself, for the part of her that had once been lost but was finding its way home. Her neighbors began to notice the sound of piano music coming from her apartment every evening. Some stood outside their doors to listen. They didn't know who lived there, but the music made them smile. A few children even sat in the hallway, quietly listening until the last note faded. Weeks passed and she started receiving more letters. Some came from faraway places, others from her own town. People shared their stories, of loss, of hope, of healing, all inspired by her playing. Each letter became a piece of her own healing too. Then one day she received an invitation. The same charity group was hosting another event, this time even bigger. The message was simple. We would be honored if the veiled pianist would play once more. She held the invitation for a long time, unsure how to feel. Part of her wanted to decline. The fear of facing the crowd again was still there. But another part of her, the stronger part, whispered that maybe it was time. She spent the next few days thinking. Every time she looked at the piano, her heart raced. She practiced quietly, not for perfection, but for honesty. She didn't want to impress anyone. She just wanted to speak through music again, to tell her story without words. On the night of the new event, the hall was packed. People had come not just from the town, but from neighboring cities. Cameras were set up, journalists ready to capture every second. The audience buzzed with excitement. When she entered the building, dressed simply in a soft gray outfit and her familiar veil, the crowd gasped softly. Whispers spread quickly. She had returned. The host, now an old friend in spirit, greeted her warmly. "It's good to see you again," he said quietly, offering a reassuring smile. She nodded, her heart pounding, but her eyes were calm. As she approached the piano again, memories of that first night flashed through her mind. The fear, the trembling, the silence before the first note. But now there was no hesitation. She sat down, adjusted the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. This time, she didn't need to take a deep breath. She simply began to play. The first note rang out, and once again, the hall fell silent. But the sound was different now, fuller, brighter, stronger. The audience could feel it immediately. Her music had changed. It carried the weight of her journey, the pain, the healing, the quiet triumph. People began to tear up again, just as they had before, but this time it wasn't sadness they felt. It was something like hope. Her melody told a story of rising after falling, of finding light again after years in the dark. When the final note faded, the room was quiet again. That same perfect, breathless silence. Then came the applause, thunderous, unending, filled with emotion. And though she didn't remove her veil, everyone felt like they truly saw her that night. Not her face, but her heart. After that night, the world began to see the veiled pianist as something more than just a mystery. Her second performance touched hearts even deeper than the first. Videos of it spread like wildfire, gathering millions of views within days. People spoke about the way she played, not for fame, not for applause, but from the soul. Her music felt honest, like a voice that had been silent for too long finally speaking again. In interviews, the host described the moment with a kind of quiet wonder. "It wasn't just music," he said softly. "It was life itself playing through her hands." The town became proud of her, even though no one knew her name. Local shops hung posters of the concert, calling her the Veiled Miracle. People played her performances in cafes and cars. Some even said her music helped them find peace when words couldn't. But while the world celebrated, she remained hidden. Her small apartment stayed her safe space, quiet, familiar, and filled with the gentle presence of her piano. Every morning she would sit before it, close her eyes, and let her fingers move without thinking. Each note she played carried a piece of her heart, the pain, the healing, the memories she still couldn't talk about. She didn't crave the attention or the praise. What she wanted most was to stay connected to her music, to the feeling it gave her, that sense of being alive again. Still, part of her wondered what would happen if people knew who she really was. Sometimes when she watched the videos of her performances, she barely recognized herself. The woman behind the veil seemed braver, stronger, freer. The truth was, the veil wasn't about hiding from others. It was about protecting the fragile part of herself that still feared breaking again. But one afternoon, something unexpected happened. A letter arrived from a music foundation in the city. They had seen her videos and wanted to invite her to perform at a charity concert for young musicians recovering from trauma and loss. It was a cause close to her heart, one that mirrored her own story. The letter was gentle and respectful. It said they understood if she wanted to remain anonymous, but that her music could inspire many people who had lost hope. She read it several times. Her fingers trembled slightly as she held the page. The thought of standing on a stage again in front of hundreds, maybe thousands of people terrified her. Yet something inside her whispered that maybe this was the reason she had been given another chance. Maybe her music wasn't just meant for herself anymore. For days, she couldn't decide. She spent long hours at the piano playing quietly, as if searching for an answer in the melodies. Every time she touched the keys, she felt that same familiar pull, the one that had drawn her to the stage in the first place. It was fear mixed with longing, hesitation mixed with courage. Finally, late one night, she sat by the window with the letter in her lap. The city lights outside flickered softly, and in that moment she made her decision. She would go. The next few weeks were filled with preparation. She practiced every day, not to impress anyone, but to find honesty in her music. She didn't want perfection, she wanted truth. Her hands were stronger now, though they still ached at times. She didn't push too hard. She played with patience, listening to the rhythm of her own breath. The night before the concert, she stood before the mirror, her veil folded neatly beside her. She looked at her reflection for a long time. The woman looking back wasn't the same person she had been years ago. Fragile, broken, afraid to touch the piano. This woman had lived through pain, faced silence, and still found her way back to music. The next morning, she arrived early at the grand concert hall. The place was enormous, far bigger than the community hall where she had first played. The sound of her footsteps echoed as she walked across the polished floor. The piano stood at the center of the stage, elegant and waiting. She ran her fingers gently along the edge of it, feeling both nervous and at peace. As the time for the concert drew near, the hall filled with people. Journalists, musicians, families, everyone had come to see the veiled pianist. Some were curious, others hopeful. But most were simply drawn by the power of her story, even though they didn't know all of it. Backstage, she sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. A young girl, maybe 12 years old, approached her shyly. The girl was holding a small music notebook and wore a brace on her arm. "Are you nervous?" the girl asked softly. The veiled pianist smiled beneath the fabric. "A little," she admitted. The girl nodded. "Me too. I'm playing the violin tonight," she said. "My hand doesn't move right anymore, but I still want to try." The pianist looked at her with warmth in her eyes. "That's the most important thing," she said gently. "Trying. Never stop trying." The girl smiled, encouraged, and hugged her quickly before running off to join the others. The moment filled her heart with quiet strength. When her turn finally came, she stepped onto the stage, the spotlight following her. The audience fell silent the moment they saw her. She could feel the energy of hundreds of eyes watching her, waiting, but instead of fear, she felt something different this time. Calm. She sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and began to play. The first notes floated softly through the hall, light and tender. The melody carried a sense of memory, a reflection of where she had been and what she had become. As she played, the story of her life unfolded through sound. The loss, the silence, the rediscovery, the return of hope. Her fingers moved with confidence now, flowing effortlessly across the keys. She no longer hid behind her music, she was part of it. Every chord seemed to speak to someone in the audience. Some people wiped tears quietly. Others closed their eyes, lost in the sound. Midway through the piece, her playing grew bolder. The music swelled, filled with emotion and power. It was as if she was saying, "I'm still here." The notes rang out like a heartbeat, steady, alive, unbroken. When she reached the final passage, her hand slowed, the melody softening again into something peaceful. She let the last note linger until it faded into silence. For a few seconds, the room was still. Then came the applause, long, thunderous, heartfelt. She stood, bowed slightly, and stepped back from the piano. The sound of clapping surrounded her. But what touched her most was the faces in the crowd, people smiling through tears, holding hands, standing together in a shared moment of understanding. Backstage, the young violinist ran to her again, eyes shining. "You did it," she said. "That was so beautiful." The pianist smiled softly. "You'll do beautifully too," she said, placing a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "Just play from your heart. That's all that matters." Later that night, when the concert ended, she stayed behind after everyone left. The hall was empty now, quiet except for the soft hum of lights. She sat down at the piano once more alone and played a short, gentle tune just for herself. She didn't notice the janitor sweeping nearby, who stopped to listen. He stood there for a moment, eyes closed, smiling faintly as her music filled the quiet space. When she finally stopped, she felt lighter, not because of the applause, but because she had finally faced the thing that once scared her most. She realized that her music had given something back to the world, and the world had given something back to her: acceptance. As she left the hall that night, the cold air brushed against her face. She paused outside, looking up at the stars. She could hear faint echoes of her own music still ringing in her mind. She smiled to herself, knowing that this wasn't the end of her story. Something had shifted inside her, a quiet strength, a peace she hadn't known in years. The veil still rested over her face, but it no longer felt like a shield. It felt like a part of her story, a reminder of where she had been and how far she had come. She walked home slowly, her heart calm and steady, the sound of music still alive in her hands. The night after the big concert, she didn't sleep much. The echoes of her own music kept running through her head. Every note she had played seemed to replay softly in her mind, reminding her of the emotions she had poured into it. For the first time in a long time, she felt something close to peace, but mixed with that peace came an ache she couldn't ignore. The applause had been beautiful, but what stayed with her most were the faces in the audience, the tears, the smiles, the quiet stillness when her last note faded. She had seen herself reflected in them, people who carried pain but were still trying to move forward. It made her realize that her story wasn't just hers anymore. The next morning, sunlight spilled across her apartment, falling on her piano like a soft blessing. She sat quietly with a cup of tea, her hands wrapped around the warm mug. Her fingers still ached from hours of playing, but she didn't mind. That pain had become part of her, a reminder of everything she had overcome. She reached for the old scrapbook she kept tucked in a drawer. Inside were photos from years ago before the accident, pictures of concert halls, music competitions, and smiling audiences. There was one photo of her on stage, no veil, just her natural self with a wide, confident smile. She barely recognized the woman in that picture. She looked so alive, so sure of herself. The memories were bittersweet. Back then, her entire world revolved around the piano. She had traveled, performed, taught students, and even composed a few small pieces of her own. Music had been her identity, until one rainy night changed everything. She had been on her way home after a performance, tired but happy, when a car accident shattered that life in an instant. Her hands were badly injured. Doctors had worked hard to save them, but they told her she might never regain full strength or flexibility. That sentence had broken her more deeply than the pain of the injuries themselves. For months, she refused to even look at a piano. She couldn't bear the thought of touching something that once brought her joy but now represented loss. Slowly, she withdrew from everyone she knew. Invitations stopped coming. Students moved on. The woman who once filled rooms with music faded into silence. But even silence has a sound. At night, she could still hear melodies in her head, unfinished pieces that refused to leave her alone. One evening, she couldn't take it anymore. She sat down at her old piano and placed her trembling hands on the keys. The first sound was uneven, weak, but it was real. It was life coming back in small pieces. That was how her recovery began. Not with medicine or therapy alone, but with sound. Every day she forced herself to play, even if only for a few minutes. Her hands would hurt, but her heart felt lighter each time. She began to understand that her music didn't have to be perfect to be meaningful. Now, years later, she had returned to the stage not as the same woman from those old photos, but as someone who had learned to rebuild from the ashes. Her music had changed because she had changed. That morning, as she turned the pages of the scrapbook, a small envelope slipped out and landed on the floor. It was yellowed with age, sealed but never opened. Her breath caught when she recognized the handwriting. It was from her mentor, the one person who had believed in her from the very beginning. He had sent it while she was still in recovery, but she had never been able to bring herself to open it. With trembling fingers, she carefully tore it open. The note inside was short. It read, "Music doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for truth. When you are ready, play again, not for the world but for yourself. The world will hear it when it's meant to." Her eyes filled with tears. The letter felt like it had been waiting for this exact moment. She whispered softly, "I'm ready now." Later that week, she received another letter, this time from a journalist who had covered her recent concert. It wasn't a formal interview request, just a handwritten note asking if she would share her story. "People want to know the person behind the music," it said. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to keep her identity hidden forever. The veil had become her comfort, a symbol of privacy, a quiet shield from the world. But another part of her wondered if maybe revealing her story could help others who had lost their way too. That night, she sat by her piano again, thinking about what to do. She played a soft melody, almost like a conversation between her heart and her mind. Every note seemed to answer the question she couldn't say aloud. By the time she stopped, she had made up her mind. If she was going to tell her story, she wanted to do it in her own way, through her music. So she decided to hold a small public concert herself. No sponsors, no press teams, no fancy lights. Just her piano, and the truth. She rented a modest theater in the city, big enough for a few hundred people. She sent out invitations that simply said, "An evening of music and truth," by the veiled pianist. When the night arrived, the air outside the theater was cool and calm. People gathered quietly, their faces lit with anticipation. Some brought flowers, others held letters or small gifts. They weren't there to see a celebrity. They were there to feel something real. Backstage, she adjusted her veil in front of the mirror. For a long moment, she stared at her reflection. Then she took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. When the lights dimmed and the audience settled, she appeared, walking slowly toward the piano. The applause was gentle, respectful. She sat down, let the silence stretch, and then began to speak softly into the microphone beside her. "I've been hiding behind this veil for a long time," she said, her voice calm but steady. "I wore it not because I wanted to be mysterious, but because I was afraid. Afraid of how people would see me after I lost everything that once defined me. I thought my scars, my pain, and my weakness made me less. But I was wrong. They made me real." The crowd listened, silent and moved. I was told I would never play again, but music found its way back to me. It healed me when nothing else could. Tonight I want to share not just the sound, but the truth behind it. With that, she began to play. The first few notes were gentle, like a whisper. The melody was new, something she had composed herself. A piece born from years of struggle, silence, and rediscovery. As the music grew, so did its emotion. It spoke of darkness, pain, hope, and courage. Each note seemed to pull the audience deeper into her journey. Halfway through, she paused for a brief second, her hands hovering above the keys. Then slowly, she reached up and removed her veil. The crowd gasped softly, not because of shock, but because of what that gesture meant. Her face bore faint scars, but there was beauty in them, the kind of beauty that comes from surviving something that tried to destroy you. Her eyes were calm, her expression peaceful. She didn't say a word. She simply continued to play, and that moment, the sight of her uncovered face, the sound of her heart flowing through the piano, became something people would never forget. By the time she played the final note, tears streamed down many faces in the audience. Some stood immediately, clapping through their emotion. Others simply sat, overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. When she stood and bowed, she smiled for the first time in years, not a small hidden smile, but a real one. The veil that had once shielded her was now folded on the piano, no longer needed. After the concert, she stepped outside into the cool night. People greeted her warmly, some thanking her, others simply offering quiet nods of respect. She spoke kindly to everyone, grateful but humble. As she walked home under the stars, the city lights flickered gently around her. She felt free, not because she had shown her face, but because she had shown her truth. Her mentor's words echoed in her heart. Music doesn't ask for perfection. It asks for truth. And finally, she had given the world hers. After revealing her face and sharing her story, the world seemed to shift around her. People were no longer curious only about the mysterious veil. They were curious about her courage, her journey, and the music that had carried so much emotion. But she didn't seek fame. She didn't want to be a headline or a trending topic. She wanted her music to speak, and the rest she believed would follow naturally. Letters and messages poured in from all over. Some were short, simply saying thank you. Others were long, recounting personal struggles, losses, or moments of despair that had been eased by her music. One letter came from a young woman who had stopped playing the piano herself after a hand injury. She wrote that watching the veiled pianist perform had made her pick up her instrument again. Another came from a teacher in a small town, explaining how she had played the video for her students and how the children had listened in awe. "They've never seen someone play with so much heart," the teacher wrote. "You have reminded all of us that music is more than notes. It's life." Each letter left a mark on her. She read them carefully, sometimes more than once. Her heart swelled not with pride, but with a deep, quiet joy. This was why she had returned to music. This was why she had faced her fears, removed her veil, and played again. A few weeks later, invitations to perform came from all sorts of places: small concert halls, charity events, and even international festivals. She didn't accept everything. She was cautious. She wanted to choose carefully, to make sure each performance carried meaning, not just spectacle. When she agreed to a few select events, she continued to maintain her calm, humble presence. On stage, she no longer needed a veil. She played freely, every note a reflection of her journey, every melody a testament to her courage. Audiences were captivated not just by her skill, but by the honesty in her music. Each performance felt personal, as though she was speaking directly to each listener's heart. Over time, she became known not only as a pianist, but as an inspiration. People admired how she had faced adversity and reclaimed her passion. But even with recognition growing, she remained grounded. She still returned home each evening, sat by her piano, and played quietly for herself. The public applause was satisfying, but the true reward was always in the music itself, the quiet moments when her fingers found the keys, and her heart spoke without words. One day, she received a letter from a child recovering from an illness. The child had loved music but had been too weak to attend school or lessons. Through videos of her performances, the child had begun learning again, slowly and carefully. "I hope one day I can play like you," the note read. "Thank you for showing me I can try again." She placed the letter gently on her piano and smiled. It was small gestures like this, little ripples of hope, that reminded her why she had returned to music. It wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about connection, about helping others find courage through something as simple and powerful as sound. Her performances began to evolve. She started composing new pieces, melodies inspired by her experiences, the letters she received, the stories she heard. Each composition was unique, carrying her emotions, struggles, and triumphs in a language everyone could understand. People listened, and in return they shared pieces of their own lives. Her music had become a bridge connecting hearts across distances. Years passed, and she became a symbol of resilience. Schools invited her to speak to students about perseverance and courage. Hospitals asked her to play for patients recovering from injuries or illnesses. She always agreed, bringing with her the quiet message that no matter how hard life became, hope and strength could still be found. Evenings at home remained her sacred time. She would sit by her piano, sometimes playing melodies she had written years ago, sometimes improvising. The music had become a conversation with herself, with the world, and with those who listened, even if they were far away. She realized that music didn't just heal others, and it healed her too. Then came a particularly special invitation. A charity foundation asked her to perform for children affected by natural disasters. She accepted immediately, seeing the opportunity to share not only music but also hope. When she arrived at the small town where the concert was to be held, she was greeted by faces filled with curiosity, uncertainty, and quiet hope. She sat at the piano, glancing at the children who watched her with wide eyes. Their expressions reminded her of herself when she had first returned to music, cautious, unsure, but longing for courage. She began to play, soft and gentle at first. The melody grew, flowing into the room, filling every corner with warmth and comfort. Some children clutched their parents' hands. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. A few even started humming along, small smiles forming on their faces. The entire hall seemed to breathe with the music, the sound weaving through hearts and minds alike. By the time the final note faded, tears were on many cheeks, and not only from sadness but from the beauty of connection. The children had been reminded that even after loss and fear, joy could return. That night, as she walked out of the hall, several little hands reached for hers. They didn't speak much, but their eyes said everything. Gratitude, admiration, hope.